James Carafano is a national security expert at the Heritage Foundation. He oversaw national security planning during the Trump transition. Also joined by former National Security Advisor Sir Mark Lyle Grant. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. May I start with you, please, James, while you're with us in the studio. Thank you for joining us this morning. Hopefully it wasn't too difficult to get through the cordons.
It's actually dead out there. It's dead still.
Is that right?
Yeah, there's like nobody in Black Lives Matter Plaza. And you go down a block and there's literally nobody in the streets.
Well, let's see what happens over the next few days, because, of course, it is really an election result that nobody wanted, isn't it?
Well, we don't have an election result
yet.
That's
the point.
There's a couple of things I think to keep in mind. First of all, we've had disputed elections, even in recent memory. We had Gore v. Bush. America did just fine. Our place in the world was secure. Nobody really tried to take advantage of that. I think that's important. A record number of Americans voted. Historic levels. Doesn't matter who they voted for. The fact that they voted, that is an endorsement of the system and a confidence in the system. And I think that shows that Americans are not divided. And
let me just pick you up on that, if I may. Sorry to interrupt. You say that, but the president is trying to stop legally cast ballots from being counted.
So, look, we had disputed election in Gore v. Bush. And, Americans were just fine. And I think the third thing is we've had a spate of political violence in the U.S. That's true. But support for mass demonstrations has dropped dramatically in the United States. It's dropped because people don't like the rioting, don't like the looting. I think if there is post-election violence, it'll largely be a turnoff for Americans. I don't think it'll get very far. So I actually think Americans will weather this, whether it's a day or 2 days or a week or more.
Or a
pretty
month,
well,
as it was in year 2000.
Which is fine, but in our system, we have between November and January to kind of sort these things out if need be, and we have a constitutional process to sort it out if it's a tie, 269 to 269. So I don't think in the big picture of things this is an interesting historical footnote, but I don't think it's going to really displace America's role in the world or have a lot of long-term impact of itself. Now, how the election played out, the fact whether more minorities shifted their votes or older people shifted their votes and states shifted their votes, political parties will be dealing with that. But that's a long-term thing.
Sir Mark Lyle Grant, former National Security Advisor, joining us as well. Your thoughts on that, please, Sir Mark. The fact that the United States has not yet decided who its next president will be, and the incumbent is saying don't count all of those votes.
Well, it's clearly a little bit of a shambolic situation. I can understand why Dominic Raab doesn't want to be drawn on that, because we don't know yet who is going to be the future president of the United States. But I would add one point to what James has just said, which is that, of course, President Trump is the president until the middle of January, whatever happens in this election. So in that sense, there are certain weeks, indeed months, to sort out who's actually going to become the president thereafter. There is always this period in American politics called the lame duck period, if there is a change of administration, which is awkward for America's allies, frankly. If it is Trump who eventually emerges, then there's continuity. If it is Biden, there's still going to be this lame duck period where President Trump is president for the next 2 months. And that poses challenges for all of America's friends around the world anyway.
Not least the UK, Sir Mark, because we've got a bit of a trade deal to sort out, haven't we?
We do have a trade deal to sort out, and I think it's probably fair to say that if President Trump is re-elected, that may be slightly smoother than it would be if President Biden or Joe Biden becomes president. But there are counter areas, and defense, security, intelligence is one, which, frankly, it doesn't really matter hugely who is president, because 7/8 of the relationship is beneath the surface between the establishments, as I'm sure James will agree. And in those defense, security, intelligence, that will continue irrespective of who eventually becomes president. So there will be some advantages in President Trump being there, particularly on the trade side. There'll be many, probably more advantages, frankly, if President Joe Biden becomes president in areas like climate. And I would make another point, which is the predictability of foreign policy, security policy making. I think America's allies, and particularly the United Kingdom, would welcome a sort of more normalized policy making process. And I think that's what Joe Biden would offer.
Well, I think this administration, part of the reason why I'm not really worried is if you look around the world today, I think this administration's actually set things up pretty good. It's the stablest it's been in the Middle East for quite some time. We have countries normalizing relations with Israel. U.S. alliances.
Not at all worried about Iran. What's going on?
Well, I mean, Iran's in the worst shape it's ever been in. Its economy is going nowhere. It's got enormous internal disputes. All its surrogates are under enormous amount of pressure. They've been actually very risk averse in recent months. Now, they've done some covert things under the table, but that just reflects their weakness. I mean, in the Indo-Pacific, it's the strongest alliance structure we've ever had. All the great democracies, Japan, India, U.S., Australia, that's the strongest it's ever been. This administration actually has much better relations with Latin America, particularly all the key countries, Mexico, Central America, and Brazil. And so I actually think that we're in kind of a quiet period right now, and so I don't really see big issues there.
Okay, looking at a Hawaii projection, do you want to guess?
Let me guess. I'm guessing it's for Biden.
You're right.
There are actually Republicans in Hawaii because I've met them, but here's the deal: I think I've met all of them.
Fair enough. 4 electoral college votes. The projection is 65% to 33% for Vice President Biden. He would like to be the next president of the United States. Let's bring in Sir Mark again, if I may. Sir Mark, do you agree with the analysis that things have never been calmer in the Middle East?
Not wholly, no. But there are certainly some foreign policy achievements that President Trump can point to. He has managed to develop these so-called Abraham Accords, peace between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, etc., which has calmed down the region a little bit. I think the airstrike against General Soleimani in January of Iran has actually tempered a little bit Iranian behavior. But on the other hand, I think pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal was a mistake, and Iran is now pressing ahead with its nuclear weapons program. And also, I think that the Israel-Palestine issue has not been resolved, the fundamental issue that's been a fly in the ointment in the Middle East over the last 50 years. So I think there are some unresolved issues, and I wouldn't call the region as a whole calm at the moment, because in the absence of American direct involvement, we have seen greater Russian involvement in the region and greater Turkish involvement in the region, none of which is beneficial for the long-term stability of the Middle East.
What he said.
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, Russia's going nowhere in the Middle East. They are in Syria. They're always in Syria. It's enormously costly for them to be there, and they've gained really nothing for it. They're going nowhere in Libya. So they've got no path forward in the Middle East. Matter of fact, Russia's pretty much distracted. They've got Armenia and Azerbaijan war in their own backyard. They've got Belarus to worry about. They're going nowhere in Georgia. They're going nowhere in Ukraine. So Russia's played out. Look, I think the big thing in the Middle East is Syria's been relatively quiet. And here's the thing. Everybody, look, we all have different facts about the Iran deal. I get that. We all have different histories. Doesn't matter. History's in the past. There's no do-over. Every responsible person you talk to in the Biden camp and in the Trump camp, they want the same thing. They want a stronger deal that deals with the missiles, that deals with the nuclear program, that makes people in the region less worried about proliferation. So the reality is, shocker, these two men are not actually that far apart on Iran. They both want a stronger deal. And I think if either one is in the White House, that will be U.S. policy.
Do you agree, Sir Mark?
Well, I don't wholly agree on that, but I would make a wider point, because my biggest concern about President Trump is not the policies, the individual policy differences that we have, but it's that his administration has weakened the rules-based international order on which countries like the United Kingdom, open democratic trading countries, depend. So he has weakened the United Nations, he's weakened the WTO, he's weakened the WHO, and so he has not invested in American leadership that we would traditionally like to see. You know, the President of the United States is traditionally the leader, the champion of the liberal rules-based international order. And because President Trump himself does not believe in that order, he has opened the field for countries like China to actually put forward a different values-based international idea. And that is very, very damaging in the long term for countries like the United Kingdom.
OK, James, Sir Mark, it's good to speak to both of you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks a lot.